youth issues, sport, and all sorts of other things, and
post-secondary education.
You know, no big deal.
Not that that matters.
No, not at all. No. Well, if you don't know who this is, you know, Justin Trudeau, MP for Papineau Riding.
Like barriers.
Whoa, do we really?
Okay, you know what? Great to see you guys all fired up about politics. Yeah. Listen, this is part of a tour I've been doing for the past few days, but really it's part of a tour that I've been on probably since I got elected, if not before I got elected. One of the things that has driven me in politics is first of all, a belief that it is possible to make a difference through politics. I was very lucky growing up where most of us end up being introduced to politics through watching our parents grumble about broken campaign promises, or you know, taxes, or you know, potholes that the politicians refuse to fix. I got to grow up watching people come up to my father and tell him, and then later me, how much of an impact he had on their lives and in their conception of themselves and their country. And I always got to see that politics can be a very meaningful, very powerful way to make a difference. But it wasn't the path that I chose automatically or out of a sense of duty or family tradition. I actually chose to become a teacher. I was a high school teacher for about 5 years in Vancouver, teaching French and math. Then I did a little more activism around youth issues, involved in Katimavik, Canada's National Youth Service Program. I also spent some time working on environmental awareness, being an advocate for organizations like CPAWS and the Nature Conservancy of Canada. And then at one point, politics opened itself up as a possibility to me. And I'd always thought that politics would be something I'd be able to do later in life, perhaps, once I had achieved the kinds of things that would justify my last name, demonstrate that I was coming in on my own merits and not just on the coattails of my father. But I realized that there was something lacking in politics that I had a capacity to connect with, and that was a sense of youth, a sense of responding to young people and speaking for young people. And I realized that if I set the bar high enough in terms of trying to get elected in a very difficult area, that people would overlook the fact of my last name and realize that perhaps I had things to bring myself. So I got into politics, and the criticisms that surrounded me at first, what has he ever done? He's too young to be in politics. I was 36 years old, and I don't know what those same people are saying about the 5 McGill students who are now MPs for the NDP. Yeah, I went to McGill. How many students do you guys have actively who are currently MPs? It becomes almost a ridiculous thing, but listen, there's an opportunity for young people now to take a higher level of interest and involvement in politics. Unfortunately, the reality is 18 to 25-year-olds tend to vote at about 30%. Maybe 33, maybe 38% in some elections, but in general, we're way below where we need to be. And the reason for it, for me, is not actually a reflection on young people who get a reputation for being apathetic and cynical sometimes, but if there's apathy, it comes not from caring, not from not caring, but from caring so much that we're frustrated that we don't get to have an impact. We don't get to be heard. We don't get to have influence. And if there's cynicism, it comes from being as idealistic as we are as young people. And when we are confronted with the realities of how politics operates, how it tends to be more about scoring points off of the opponent than actually building a better society, about learning how to strategically divide ridings into subgroups so you can appease and please certain people and ignore the people who weren't going to vote for you before. Of course we're going to get cynical about politics. And part of this tour for me is about trying to share with young people my passion for politics, trying to share with all of you the idea that politics can be about a conversation. It can be about a discussion around values and the best way to achieve those values without having to name call or attack on a superficial level like unfortunately works so regularly in politics these days. So my role as official critic for youth, post-secondary education and sport has me engaged in a lot of issues that are of importance to young people. And this is not going to be a huge speech. We'll get into a conversation about politics, about issues, about the world, about whatever it is that you particularly care to ask me about. But we have a shift in our thinking that we have to engage with that, for me, touches on my mandate, which is to start thinking more long-term. We have a world in which everything has become so short-term, and politicians are focused on getting re-elected and just putting a Band-Aid on the problem so they can make it to the next election cycle, rather than saying, how are we going to be able to serve our country over the next 10 years, over the next 30 years, with the right decisions we take now. And it's not just the fault of politicians, it becomes also the fault of consumers of politics. Just calling them consumers of politics points out part of the problem. But we look for quick fixes. What have you done for me lately? But part of that is because we no longer believe when politicians say, I've got a plan for the long term. So there's a broken system on both sides, where politicians don't talk about the things that are actually meaningful because people don't believe them when they try to. And people don't believe politicians can deal with the big issues, so we expect that short term. We look at an election platform comparison as if it's a menu. Okay, what does better for me? If I take column A, I get this much in my pocket. If I take column B, they'll leave me alone on these things. What am I going to pick on that? And there's no sense of trying to build a story, a national narrative, where we're trying to go as a country, what we need to step up to. Because the challenges we're facing right now are massive. Whether we look at the environmental challenges facing the world, the issues around poverty, the issues around the conflicts that are going to inevitably arise from resource depletion and crippling gaps between the haves and the have-nots and the have-yachts. The challenge we have is to be players in that. And it's to start thinking, using our extraordinary opportunities as people living in the best country in the world, but incredibly lucky to live here, to start thinking about our role on the planet writ large. And specifically, our role as young people who think differently than those short-term leaders we have, short-term thinker leaders that we have right now. Because shifting our thinking is something, and shifting our basic assumptions about the world is something we need to do. For millennia, human beings found that the world was so big it was practically flat. We thought it was flat. We always knew we could travel a little bit and find more resources. There was down the valley, over the next mountain, across the great water, we could settle, we could expand. The world seemed infinitely big.